Hello, welcome back to IASA's Virtual Leadership Series. I'm Darin Reffit, the Director of Product Marketing Excellence with Guidewire Software and the Chair of e-Learning with IASA. I'm here again today with Kerry, Crockett, our CEO of IASA, and Cathy Ellwood, the founder of Ellwood Enterprises. And today we're going to talk about lessons learned. So this is the final in our series. We're so excited that you've joined us through this entire series covering what's happened with the COVID pandemic and how we've reacted organizationally across a wide range of topics. But there's still some things that we haven't necessarily looked back, at 6 months of this or more and said, well, what are some of the key themes that have really taken us throughout the pandemic that we've learned? And so, Cathy, Kerry, let me start with this. Let me start with people. I saw a meme on Twitter recently that said something like, if you learn nothing else through COVID, we've learned that job your company always told you couldn't be done from home can in fact be done from home. And if you're not in fast food service or in retail, I think there's a lot of validity to that. But there's two sides to it, right? There's the fact that we've learned that a lot of people can work from home. I think we've also learned that a lot of people don't want to work from home and that this is not, in fact, an environment that they want to be in. So why don't we start with the first one? How much of an impact do you think this is going to have on insurers and other business B2B companies, or how much is this impact going to impact things like office space and what we do in the long term when we're past COVID? Why don't we start with you, Cathy?
Well, I think it's going to change the nature of work for many years to come. And you've touched on several of the factors. And what I'm seeing, first of all, is that a lot of executives have always complained about their people not being willing and ready to change, not being able to embrace new technologies or learn different ways of working. And then practically overnight, what happens? They're able to work from home. They're able to adjust multiple and really competing priorities. They're always on. But, as you step back and as you look at it, you realize that work from home has a lot of advantages, and it's going to save companies money. It's going to allow people to be more flexible in when they work, and people are more motivated. I mean, everyone I've talked to enjoys it. They miss the interaction of people, but they really love it. And so I don't think we're ever going to go back to the way it was. I guess bottom line for the answer to that question, Darin, I don't think it's ever going to be everybody's back in the office again. What do you think, Kerry?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Cathy. I mean, when I'm talking to my folks and colleagues as well, we're hearing the same thing where people really enjoy it. I think, in the beginning, it was very difficult because people were so used to, working from, in an office, and they had that everyday interaction with folks. And, then they had to transition to home, and they weren't necessarily set up for a home office. And so that was kind of a challenge. But I think over the last months that we've been through this, people have adjusted and they've adapted and they've kind of filled in some of those challenges that they were having with office space or with, Zoom meetings and kind of different ways of engaging each other in the workspace. And so I definitely think people are really enjoying it. I know myself, I've always enjoyed working from home. And so I think it's just something that we're going to see continue as we move through this.
So here's one thing, though, that really fascinates me. And we really don't spend enough time reflecting on this. People were able to change practically overnight.
Yeah.
And what I found amazing is they put everything on hold that they were doing, got this new way of being and working up and running, and companies gave people the resources that they needed to do their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you think about it, a lot of times people get asked to do more with less, and then they wonder, why don't they ever get anything done? Well, in this instance, look what happened. We gave them the tools, the training, the technology that they need to do their jobs, and they rose to the occasion. And I don't want to lose sight of that because it's definitely a critical success factor.
Yeah,
I agree 100%. I will say, I do think there's, our company, and I think this is public now, they announced it internally at least, our company, as part of this, actually went back to the drawing board and kind of looked at, do we really need to hire in the Bay Area, San Francisco, San Mateo area? Or should we just be finding the best person and having them work remotely? And of course, there are some jobs where, you need to be in a certain location and you need teams being able to get together. And they're finding other tools, but we're still losing a little bit of efficiency there. But they've actually come out to us with a thing that says, when this is all over, you need to let us know. Are you going to be working 3 or more days in the office with an assigned location, or are you going to be 2 or fewer days where you're going to have to reserve a desk and you're not going to have dedicated space? And these are choices we're going to have to make, and make sure we're comfortable with. The other side of that is there are people who are taking that, saying they want that 3 days because they don't, they just aren't set up for this. It's not what they enjoy. And they're feeling a lot of stress with, having all of their life all confined in one little space.
Yeah, and I think home life really, I'm sorry, Kathy. No, I was just gonna say, I think it really makes a difference on what's happening in your home life. If you've got small kids that are under your feet and you're trying to get your job done, that's gonna be a big challenge, obviously. If you don't have a space within your home that really lends itself to working so that you can focus and concentrate, I mean, you need to be in that office space to be able to perform the way you need to perform. I mean, so it definitely, the home life is making a big impact on the decisions that people are making.
And what I was going to interject on that statement that you made, Darren, is that decision to allow people to live anywhere and hire people anywhere creates a whole new set of challenges. Because if you're living in Oklahoma, the cost of living may not be the same as the Bay Area, right?
Right.
So how do they deal with the compensation issues? So, there's a lot of advantages, but there are also some challenges that organizations really need to take some time to think about. And Kerry, to your point, this was hilarious. I'm doing a virtual leadership session the other day, and I think there were several hundred, maybe close to 1,000 people online, and my phone was ringing. And I had no choice. I had no choice but to keep my phone on because somebody very near to me was in surgery. And I had to just finally, after it rang 3 times, I had to talk to people about, I need to apologize to you, but in this COVID world, we, in so many ways we're, distanced, but in so many ways we're closer. And I need to let you know what's going on and why.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I have not heard any negative feedback about taking the time to be authentic and let people know what was going on in my life. Whereas if I were working in an office, you would have never known that anything was wrong.
Yeah.
That's, sorry, go ahead, Kerry.
No, I'm sorry too. I was just gonna say, I think one thing that I've noticed is that people seem to be more compassionate with each other now than they were, before all this started. I mean, folks who didn't have those kinds of challenges at home and now they're thrown into a situation where they do have those challenges, they're seeing that, oh, wow, this is not as easy as, I used to think it was. I mean, I've got now facing the same challenges that others are. And so I think people are just more compassionate. And I think that's a nice thing to see when you're talking about teams that you want to collaborate and work with and work really well together. So it's been good to bring our team together anyway.
I was going to say something very similar, which is I think it's a familiarity thing. I mean, I would never in a million years have wanted to join a company. And Kerry, you joined not too long before this happened as well. So you probably experienced this as well, right? Even though I'm a remote employee, my plan starting this job was, I would be in San Mateo a couple times in the first, month and a half. I would be meeting with my team and in offsites and stuff. But instead, I have this, right? I have a screen and I have a camera. And yet I've gotten to know people on a level I never would have gotten to know people on because, and I'm so much more understanding now, right? Because it's one thing for someone to walk in the office and say, you know what? Yeah, the kids were just really rambunctious today. And it's like, yeah, but you were supposed to get me that report by 10. It's another thing to see their home life and see the chaos and see the reality of their life. It just breeds a level of empathy that I don't think you can have in an office space. And I think we're much closer. And I like my coworkers in a way I didn't, get to know them and like them in other instances.
Yeah. Well, we've been forced to make those connections. I mean, we've been actively forced to set up time and schedule time, one-on-one time with each member of our teams, to say, how are you doing? What's happening with you? How can I help, ease your burden? So that doesn't typically happen.
That's a great segue. That's a great segue because I think the next item on our list is process, right? So the flip side of that is I joined a new company and I have, someone reporting to me. And I had to not just learn what they do and get to understand them as a manager, but actually change my whole management style. So I think there's a lot of process that we've learned can be done differently and has to be done differently, right? I not a meme necessarily, but I think there's, I've seen a lot of talk about, I think COVID has brought out if you have someone who's not a great manager, who's been succeeding, despite the lack of the ability to feel compassion and empathy, to really drive the best out of their team, that this situation has kind of exacerbated that and revealed some of those challenges.
You know what I think is funny is that people who used to manage through micromanaging, checking up on a person, for the most part, even as much as looking over their shoulder, seeing what they're working on, that walking around style, which has some advantages, but trusting people has a lot more. Micromanagers, their days are, numbered because they're not going to be successful in the new environment. You've got to learn to trust your people. You've got to be very specific on your goals and the boundaries that you want for them to work with, right?
Mhm.
So, and if you're not, what happens?
Yeah, you're definitely going to have some problems. And we've talked about delegation as well.
Right.
I think that's another big piece here that folks who are not really used to delegating or they don't do it well, they've been forced to delegate because they have to give that responsibility up because the way that we are working now is taking more time really to do some of the things that we used to do easily in an office space. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily have scheduled 30-minute calls with each one of my team members, or meetings, I should say, if we were all in the same office together, because we see each other in the hall, we see each other in the kitchen, how you doing, what's happening, oh, this happened last night. But now I'm taking that time to do that, to make sure we have those opportunities for engagement. So my day is now constricted with, the abundance of meetings that I have. So work that I might have done myself, I now have to delegate because I just don't have the time to do all of those things. So I think it's forced a lot of managers to change the way that they do supervise their work and their workload and their folks that work for them.
So that brings me to a question though, Kerry. So in the old environment, you could walk around and talk to them and see how they're doing and chit chat. But now you're able to give them your dedicated time and attention and focus on the issues that matter to them. And so maybe that's a big benefit that you don't even realize
Right.
that you've created for your team, right?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, I can sense that we have become a closer team and more supportive team throughout this than we were when all this started. And even though I'm new to this organization, that's feedback that I've gotten from my team as well, that they feel like things have sort of been more cohesive. They're excited. They're motivated about the work that we're doing. So I think it's been, in that sense, in that regard, a big plus for us.
I would definitely agree. I think there's been a lot of personal, personal process we've now needed to deal with as well. Like, I think we've all probably learned to, I mean, you talked a little bit about this, Kerry, but even aside from just appointments with employees, I think we've all learned to like, okay, I need to block time on my calendar to actually get my work done.
Yeah.
I need to set boundaries. There's a big trending topic on LinkedIn about, simulated commutes right now, about how people are really learning that even if I'm not going to an office, and this was one of the best practices I would share with people when I would talk about remote work anyway, is, when you get out, you don't go right to your desk. You still have that transition in and out, or the lines just blur.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of people have done a good job of figuring out where those lines are and how to get things done that that would not have been, you wouldn't necessarily have thought they'd succeed as well as they did.
That's an interesting concept because I agree you've got to set boundaries, but I also think what started to happen, and it's not been intentional, we didn't think about this and say, people are going to be working longer hours, or they're going to be attending more meetings, or whatever. We didn't plan this, but I think we've got to be more careful that people don't get burned out. I mean, pretty much everybody I know, they're working more hours, they're getting their jobs done, they're, meeting their goals and objectives, but they're doing it, they're taking a lot more time to get it done. And it's starting to pressure them, with their families. They're starting to work on weekends a little bit more. And for leaders and, people that are on the fast track, that's a conscious choice. For at least it probably is everyone that I've ever met. But for the worker who's, individual contributor, professional, they're not used to working this many hours, time in, time out. And so I do think that we need to be a lot more aware of the way, and Kerry, I remember you saying this in one of our sessions, the ways in which we communicate and when we communicate with people. Just because you've chosen to work at 10:30 or 11 at night doesn't mean that everybody else has to.
Yeah.
That's how you get your job done. And I think we're losing sight of that.
Yeah.
The other thing, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that speaks to the boundaries that you were just talking about a minute ago. Absolutely. Yeah. Setting those boundaries.
The other thing I think that's really still first and foremost on my mind is how we build relationships, how we network with others, how we have team meetings that aren't just another Zoom call, if you will, but really, we're not going out to restaurants or going to happy hours or things like many of us were used to doing in the past. So what do we do now? How do we do that?
I'm really looking forward to seeing how people and organizations deal with holiday parties and, all those things that are coming up in December and January. There's just so many things that are part of the culture in a lot of organizations, and they're going to have to be recreated. And I'm sure we'll find great creative ways to do that. One point I do want to share, I think that this is important, is this idea of recognizing and putting those boundaries, right? Because yes, we can do it internally, but I think it's amazing from a trust standpoint for employees if your leaders are actually recognizing the change as well and ensuring that some of that time is given back and that the team is there. And I'm saying that because our CEO, Mike Rosenbaum, is very aware of that. We actually had a refresh. He called it a corporate refresh day, where he said basically the whole company is taking this day off, because if not, everyone's still checking emails. Everyone is still making sure there's no messages on Slack. And I want people to decompress. I know how hard everyone's working on all this stuff. So when we got to the end of our fiscal year, they scheduled a refresh day where everyone could go. And we have another one coming up after our annual conference, client conference here in a couple of weeks. Same thing. Everyone is focused on this. We're going to have a refresh day. And it's really powerful that that he cares enough to do that. It creates a lot of trust.
It does, and it sets the tone for for the rest of the organization. I mean, I think leaders really have to be conscious of the fact that they have to be aware of the example that they're setting. And so it's one thing to say to your team, "Oh, I want you to take the day off. I want you to relax. Hey, stop working after 5." And then you're sending out emails to your team at 10:30 at night, right?
Yep.
I mean, you're not setting that example. And so one of the things I think that we've done within our team is making sure that we're trying to set those examples. So we have long conversations around vacation and making sure that people have, scheduled their vacation and they're taking that time off. And, you can't tell every single employee, you can tell them, but that doesn't mean that every single employee is going to not respond to emails or not send something out on a day that they're off. But you certainly want to try to set that example for your team and demonstrate that it's important that they have those mental breaks and that they separate from work, because this is, we're in this going to be for a long time. I mean, this is not going to end in the next month or two. And for many companies who are talking about creating this transition where it stays this way and not going back into an office full time, I mean, you're going to have to make sure that you monitor that very closely so that your team doesn't get burnt out, because it's so easy to stay in that office or to stay on your phone and, laying in your bed and you're sending a couple of texts. And it's the first thing you do when you get out of the bed in the morning is check your email. And we're all guilty of it, but being conscious of it and then making sure that you're setting that example for your team is going to be really, really helpful, I think.
Absolutely.
One of the things that has really amazed me about all of this, and I'm changing topic just a tiny little bit, but you made me think of it, Kerry, is that we're all learning how to learn differently. In the past, we used to go to a conference, on site, or maybe we read a book. Now we're having to do deep dives into learning new technologies, right? And we're finding out that we can learn when we have no choice.
Mm-hmm.
And, even coping with, all these issues with too many meetings and being in Zoom. I mean, people's compassion levels are higher, but people are also doing things, including their kids, that they never dreamed possible. Like a third grader being able to upload and download Google Docs and knowing what it means to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's changing, it's accelerating the way that work is done in ways that we would have never dreamed we could do in this short, condensed time frame.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot to learn here about when you're driving change in organizations. How can you do it to get everybody on board, aligned, and motivated to do so?
I'm also scared there's going to be a long-term impact of having 4-year-olds using phrases like, let's table that, mom. Let's take that offline. So let's segue. I know we're running out of time. I think we've touched a little bit on technology and how it's enabled us to do our work better. But what have we learned about organizations and technology? Like, I think this is a big topic, but just at a high level, like, I think that a lot of organizations have learned that, you can't necessarily avoid, modernization of your technology and enabling, access everywhere and digital optimization. I know you talk a lot about this, Cathy. Share your thoughts, please, on
Well,
how you
so
see this taking us forward.
first of all, people that had not been thinking about and were not in the process of undergoing digital transformation with their legacy systems, they're in trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, like, just put it out there, they're in trouble and they need to get on that bus right now. And so that's point number one, I would say, from a carrier processing perspective. Being able to do things the way you always did in the past, those days are gone, I think. And it's going to be increasingly difficult for them to survive. But the other thing with regard to technology, and I don't know that we've really talked enough about it in these series, is that we need to have the right technologies and the right software solutions that enable the work to be done effectively and efficiently. And we need to be more organized, in the way we share information, the way we collaborate, the way we gather information. I mean, there's all kinds of software out there to facilitate a lot of this, but technology it always has been, in my opinion, an integral part of a strategy, right? But now it is an enabler of work. And it was in the past, but not for everybody necessarily in the organization. Now everybody has to have it. They have to use it. They have to be responsible. I think this whole issue of cybersecurity is going to bite us big time if we don't take that seriously.
Absolutely.
So it's definitely had an impact, but I think it's a good impact. I don't have a problem with it.
I'm going to agree with you there, Cathy, as well, because what's happened, and we've seen this, is that companies or organizations that were sort of reticent to make some of those moves into changing their technology or bringing in new systems from a technology standpoint, they really haven't had a choice. I mean, they've been forced to do that. And so another piece of the good news of that, as it relates to some of their budgetary issues, might be that they're not spending on travel now. And so they can invest in some of those other things, the technologies that they have not done in the past. So one of the benefits, if you want to call it a benefit of the pandemic, is that it's really forced folks to make some of those changes. And in some cases, not just dip your toe in the water, just to dive in head first and say, we've got to make these changes or we're not going to survive. And, we've seen that with our own organization, with IASA. We're having to make some of these changes in terms of systems and processes to make sure that we're able to not just survive, but to thrive on the other end of this. And so the investments that we're making now are going to be really important to our future. And I think a lot of organizations are in the same boat.
It also changes the skills that it doesn't necessarily change them. It re-emphasizes some of the skills you need as a leader though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you've got to have vision.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be able to see the possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be able to understand the risk. And you've got to have a way of bringing it all together in a format through a medium that everybody can understand and respond to. You don't have that, all hands meeting where you get to see everybody in person. It'll be a big Zoom meeting.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to build relationships in ways that you never thought about having to do before. And you know what? I do have to share this. It blew my mind. They wanted to find a way to recognize people that worked in technology. It's a company that I'm aware of very deeply. And what they wound up doing is they had an appreciation meeting where, they acknowledged each of the contributions that some of the engineers had made on projects throughout COVID. And then word started getting around and the managers wanted to be involved. And then before you knew it, the other senior leaders, well, what's going on here? Why is everybody going to this meeting? So it was something that just started changing. And, never would they have done that way in the past. But, I think that you can leverage technology to do things that maybe you never thought were possible before.
I totally agree. I'm going to jump back to something Kerry said and tie it back to what you're talking about. The idea, Kerry, of survive and not thrive when we're through this. I think if you're someone who's just trying to ride this out and, hoping for the days where you go back to the claims process you had before, or to the organizational system you had in a filing cabinet, and I think you're going to be left in the dust, because every one of your competitors is moving forward with all of these digital plans and taking advantage of these opportunities. And when you try and go back, you're just done. I think it's the end.
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree. You're right.
Yeah.
There is no going back to the way things used to be. There may be some pieces of it, some semblance of it, but it is definitely a new normal. There is no way around it.
You know what? That brings up a really interesting challenge for everybody in here, though. Have you taken the time to think about the good things that you had in the old normal, if you will? The good things about your culture that you valued, the good things about your relationships, how you evaluated people. Have you thought about the good that you want to bring forward in the new? Because we don't want to lose sight of the things that got us where we are today. What was it that made all these people respond? What was it that made people work around the clock just to get their jobs done in this world? I mean, maybe it was the keeping of the job, or maybe they were motivated because they knew their customers needed them. I don't know, but I do think as we, start reflecting about lessons learned, it's really important to think about what are the good things from the past that we don't want to let go of and we want to bring forward and leverage today.
Great point. I think at this point, we're going to wrap up and just share our final thoughts for the final time. Kerry, why don't we start with you?
Wow, there's so many things that are running through my head. I think the biggest thing for me is just be appreciative of the fact that your teams are willing to do the work that you're asking them to do in this new situation, and all of the changes that they've had to go through, and just be appreciative of that fact that everybody has been challenged through this time. And as a leader, think about how you can better support them, as we've talked about many times, how you're able to motivate them and how you're able to give them the resources they need to be productive, to be healthy, mentally, physically, emotionally, all of those things that we need to make sure that they're going to be, at the end of the day, do the good job that you need them to do. And so I think it's really important that we're just thinking those things through and continuing to be creative in them.
Great. Cathy?
I'm going to go back to relationships and collaboration and working together as a team. Just because we're working remotely doesn't mean that we don't have to be a team. And if nothing, in a lot of ways, we need to work even harder at building deep relationships. And, if you have to make a call to somebody and they're working from home, see if they can do a Zoom meeting so you can look at them and see their face and get to know them personally. I just think that we've got to have relationships, collaboration, and trust be the mantras of leaders in the future, because that's how we're going to get things done. And it's going to be the glue that holds us together, that with the right technologies, obviously. But if we don't have that, it's not going to work.
I totally agree. So my final thoughts, I'm going to tie those two things together and bring appreciation and teamwork together and say that I really appreciate all of our listeners, but more importantly, Kerry and Cathy, you have devoted so much time over the last 7 months since April. We've done, I think, 10 or 11 of these all together. And, you know, just the insights that you've shared and the attention you've given this, I really appreciate that. IASA is my volunteer team, and I love how we come together in times like this. For those of you listening, thank you for joining us. Hopefully we've helped bring some visibility and insight on what's going on and helped you in some way. And looking forward, while the virtual leadership series is ending, we are going to be introducing something that's called IASA Sound-bytes. And these are going to be short form, under 5-minute insights from leaders in the industry and on a technology, claims, accounting, skills development, management and leadership. We're just going to bring in leaders and do a quick conversation where we get 1 or 2 insights on how we can do things better and be more effective. So look for those starting soon. And thank you again for joining us, Kerry, Cathy. I can't thank you enough for all of the time you've devoted with me. Have a wonderful day and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.